All right, this is Todd Atkins, and I want you to please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification if you want to get updates whenever I make a video. And also, if you'd like to support the channel, I got 99-cent memberships out there. Um, 99 cents isn't something most of us would miss, so I thought if I do a membership, this would be one that would make sense as I'm not asking people to throw away a lot of money or anything. So if you want to support the channel, you do that, and also you can do some of the super chats and comments and whatever. But really, the memberships is the only thing I'm kind of pushing. And I always appreciate your support. Everyone who checks out the channel, comments, people who like the content that myself, Miguel, Andrew, Benjamin, some of these variety guys that I have in my lexicon of shows, so to speak. And that's going to grow more. I got more interesting people I want to bring in who I think are good intellectuals in the sport of MMA. So you'll see other shows that I'll theme around certain people. So, as always, and I appreciate all the support and be on the lookout for new episodes. Appreciate it.
Hi, I am Nick Dilly, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate for conspiracies, combat sports, and so much more. You better stay tuned, or I'll come find you. Night Queen style.
All right, this is Todd Atkins. I'm back with Mystic Miguel and Mystic Miguel Dorade. And this is a show where he's going to kind of, I don't know, maybe we could say gloat because this is one of his predictions one of his many predictions that came to fruition. And that was that the GFL didn't have an event when they were supposed to, and probably will never have an event, most likely. So, I'm just going to let Miguel take it away. And Miguel, what do you think about it?
Well, I hate to say it, but I told you so, right? And I don't usually take that tack with Mystic Miguel, but this one was kind of a no-brainer, I think. You know, when you hear on the grapevine that, they're making seven-figure paydays for their first show, that the show's not distributed on TV, um, that the venue is the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, which is a venue of about 5 or 6 thousand people. There was just no way to make your money back. Not everybody was making seven figures, but even one seven-figure payday, which, for example, Uriah Faber was rumored to have, um, it amounts to you're definitely taking a show where you're going to be in the red. And, I think the days of people losing money in MMA, and people risking money in MMA are gone. I think the UFC put an end to that because the UFC has shown what a successful model is, has shown what it takes to be in that. And it takes major, major investment to be able to even contemplate getting into the game at this point. Like, for example, we knock the PFL, but the PFL has gone through getting nine figures of investment money, and they've, at least you have a calendar where they're trying to do shows on a consistent basis and are trying to do something. But that's massive resources that they have in place. They've already been dropping the ball. Like, in other words, I think there are holes in their game that show me that they actually need more money to do it right because they're not doing it 100% right yet. So some guys that found an investor guy, and the rumor had it before the GFL bottomed out that people were starting to question whether it was going to happen or not. And the rumors I read were that the main investor made an account kind of public that had $20 million in it. And then, within 48 hours, the money was out of the account. He had pulled it back, and this type of stuff. So anyway, the guy had some money enough to put $20 million in an account for show. Um, how much money do you need to have that a $20 million loss would be something you shrug off. Because if this guy's worth is 30 million, say, losing 2/3 of your net worth overnight at the Shrine Auditorium is not going to be something that he's going to tolerate. And there's no way to show him he's going to make his money back. Even if he's worth 100, $200 million, $200 million, still 10% of his money gone overnight in smoke. Um, very few people are going to do that nowadays. Very few people are in the game that way. And I think, it was the writing was on the wall. I think one of the things, and I don't mean, I'm a fighter guy. I've always been on the fighter side, and the reason I lasted as long as I did in the sport is because I had a good connection with the athletes in terms of understanding. Most of them liked me as a person too. They knew I was honest. And because I was honest with them, they were many times honest with me. And I've talked to dozens of people, men and women, that received offers from other companies and big money offers and stuff. And almost to a man and a woman, they were going to take the offer and see what happens just because they need money. These folks are not making enough money to live. So anything that promises money, they're going to pursue it. And as soon as their trust starts to go down, then their dedication to the fight will go down. I'm just doing it for the money becomes, you know, what they will tell you behind the scenes. And I have no doubt in my mind, Anthony Pettis, Uriah Faber, these are guys who have tasted decent paydays, right? But $1 million isn't what it was when me and you were young, Todd. You know what I mean? So yeah, they may need money. They may say, an extra payday would be good right around now. Another one of those fighter paydays instead of making a few $1,000s every month, with the gym or whatever. A big payday, a big influx of cash would be great. So I'll go out there and I'll do it. But they're all kind of prepared to take the money, which is why they're going to let the organization fail. They're not going to be the ones that say, "Nah, I'm not going to do it," because of the necessity for money. And I've seen that over and over. A good example of this was there was a women's MMA organization that started up, didn't even do a show. I forget the name of it, but they did hire Tara LaRosa to be their matchmaker and their public relations person. And they offered Tara something like a $75,000 salary. And for women's fighting, especially back in those days, pre Ronda, that was a lot of money. That was more money than Tara, who was very active, had probably made in her entire career. So you're in a situation where, yeah, of course, Tara was going to take the job and she was going to do it to the best of her ability. But as soon as those checks or the checks didn't come or they stopped paying her, she was ready to move on. It is a breach of contract where they're not going to pay, then the fighters can move on. And now the fighters are all in an uproar like, we were counting on that money and this, that, the other thing. I would venture to say that behind the scenes, they're not that dumb. They know that this was risky business getting involved with a company that had no shows under their belt and signing a seven-figure contract. Um, back in the old days, Frank Shamrock used to get criticized because after his run with the UFC, he became a person who sometimes showed up for fights, sometimes didn't. And Frank is an eclectic personality also. But one of the things that Frank insisted on was money up front. I want my money first because I'm not going to put it into training camp. I'm not going to do all this and then have you fail with the show. So at least he would have some money on the failed show. Um, I don't know if that's what the GFL what caused this crash before the show or so early on in their history, but maybe it was time to do a round of payments that they did not do. And that's because, there was no way to make your money back. They didn't even have a TV contract. So under what circumstances do you think offering guys six-figure, seven-figure contracts is going to be good for business? You wanted big names, you're paying for big names, but you have no way of making your money back. So now you're actually into the business of making charitable contributions to fighters. And the days where people had enough passion for the business that they would throw some money into it are gone. Are gone. Now these guys are all businessmen that want to do this, like Don Davis.
Yeah. But like you said, I think PFL's making some good moves on some things. But um,
Yeah, if you're charting it, if you're making a chart, there have been some, especially the calendar, becoming a little more active. Um, there are some positive signs, but one thing that absolutely is not happening is they're not closing the gap with UFC.
right.
The gap with the UFC is getting bigger. The UFC is obviously the big boy. Don Davis is obviously the B League or C League or A ball compared to the major leagues of the UFC. Um, they don't have a great presence in North America. They're not doing a lot of advertising except for the freebie advertising on the news sites that publish their items as news, and
Hmm.
maybe a YouTube channel where some of the YouTube fights are getting several 100,000 views. Some are getting 25,000 views and topping off.
I've been
So
enjoying the tournaments. Have you watched them?
I've watched it here and
Yeah.
there. I watch highlights, to be honest with you, and we used to have a saying that the fighters always save the day, and you could see guys in that show are giving their all. And to that, I give the fighters credit more than the organization. What the organization is doing there is, at the very least, those guys are getting their checks and getting paid. Sometimes it's late, according to people on the grapevine and stuff. They're not always paying on time and stuff like that. But so far, everybody who's fought for the PFL has actually gotten their paychecks.
Yeah.
So they know at least they're in a stable situation. So they come in and give it their all. What's in their mindset? My belief would be that 80 to 90% of the PFL roster feels that they are in a uh, developmental league for them to get to the UFC. That none of them is thinking I'll be with the PFL in 15 years, 10 years. I'm going to play my career out here. I think they're all in tryout mode. Do the best you can. We're on a big platform in terms of compared to other shows, in smoker arenas and things like that. They're on a platform where a lot of eyes can be on the fights, and they are giving their all. And like I said, the fighters save the day a lot.
Now let's talk about something. Ariel Hawani kind of gave air to the GFL. Letting what's his name? The CEO guy come on there. I forgot his name already. Darren Owen. And letting him come on, not really giving him any challenging questions, being more of a promotional vehicle for the GFL. Now that the show hasn't happened, could someone who's kind of given them a ability to, kind of paint themselves in a positive light have some liability?
Helwani has managed to become an entity in this sport.
Right.
I remember back in 2006, 2007, when I was with Bodog, he showed up at our offices to do an interview, and I blew him off. And obviously, I didn't last much longer in the business, and he went on to become a big deal in the business. But at the end of the day, I do have a feeling that even now, where he's achieved a level of professionalism and he's an adult, he still retains a little bit of that fanboy feel. Like he does fantasize that he doesn't like Dana and the UFC's way of doing things. He criticizes at times and things like that. It's why they don't like him either, and he doesn't get a big chance to cover him. So he fantasizes at home about a company actually coming up and challenging the UFC. But I think that's a fanboy approach and not a realistic approach. So I think you have to take it into account. He is a journalist, quote unquote, for this sport, but we know the sport lacks for real journalism. So I never watch Ariel Hawani thinking we're going to get legitimate um, journalism. There was every reason to be skeptical. Daryl Owen or whatever this guy's name is,
Darren Owen, yeah.
um, Darren Owen. Um, Kudos to him for coming out in public and being, putting himself in a place, but he was in a safe place. No one was going to ask him hard questions like legitimately. What will you do if your show loses $10 million the first show out? Are you good to go for another show? Are you good? Is the investment there for honoring the rest of the contracts that you have? when One FC came out, and I've said this many times on the podcast, but when One FC came out, and to their credit, they achieved this. But when I heard that there was a company from Singapore, and now we know that Matt Hume and many MMA names, Rich Franklin, and people have been associated with them. But when they first came out, they were reaching and didn't have all those employees in place. And I said to him, I said, talk to me when you have 20 shows. When you have 20 shows under your belt, I'll become more of a believer. And well, they did it. One FC is still around. So, um, but look at the expenditures and the rumors about how much money in the red that show is, and how much, that they have a boss that has really deep pockets, and they have a boss that also has a strong passion for the sport. So, without that combination, you don't have a chance. So these guys, eh, even if they had pulled off the advertised show, the chances of them, of us reporting on show 2, show 3, show 4, into show 5, show 6 is coming up. This was never, ever going to happen. And again, with the numbers that were being thrown around, I made the prediction on one of our last podcasts that they were never going to even do the first show. And that's the case now. Um, like I said, mixed martial arts journalism is very lacking. And this was a show where I don't think it's an unfair question. I think it's a question that, um, if I was in a studio live with Darren Owen, it would make Darren uncomfortable. And I think Helwani makes the choice to present like a friendly playing field and not make someone uncomfortable. But this was a legitimate question to ask: is will there be a show 2 if you guys lose $5 million?
Well, he's made people uncomfortable in the past. A lot of people think he took money to give them positive press on the show.
That's not journalism.
Right.
And that's the whole point is, if that goes on, if that's another wrinkle to what they bring there, that you can buy good press, then that's a lot of what's wrong with MMA today, because I think you had to ask the real questions, and the real questions were going to be about the financial end. How in the world do you think? I'm assuming that the $20 million. This is an assumption. But when the guy moved $20 million into an account to show people, I'm going to assume that that was about the amount of money needed for advertising and salaries for the show. So figure, if you had one fighter making $1 million and a couple making deep six figures, you can get to about $12 million in payouts very quickly. The UFC doesn't pay out that much per show on a standard contract. Some guys get big bonuses, some guys get big pay-per-view cuts, but the standard contracts, they never reach payout of the entire card being 12, $15 million. These guys may have done that. So you move 20 million into the account to show, yeah, I can pay the salaries for this upcoming show. So if I'm making $1 million like Uriah Faber for this card, and I see 20 million in the account, I feel a little better. I feel a little more comfortable that I'm going to get paid. At least the money, at least I know the money's there. But again, the questions are you here as a philanthropist for the fighters, or are you here as a business person that wants to legitimately compete here? Because if you're a philanthropist and you have $40 billion in the bank, then yeah, you could run a handful of shows or a couple of dozen shows and pay your favorite guys good money so that they lead a little bit better lives. And then you get a lot of positive feedback. You get a lot of people, you get a lot of friends that are fighters. You can live that lifestyle. But again, to lose $20 million, I don't know if 40 billion is the correct amount, but if you're going to lose $20 million on one show, you're not worth $30 million. You're not worth $40 million. And there's going to be a threshold where you have to have a leapfrog in money, maybe to $1 billion, where that's not everybody's, not everybody's worth $1 billion. You know what I mean? There are rich guys that are not worth $1 billion. So 20 million is a serious amount of money. It was the big red flag going into this, and the fact that nobody asked this guy about it, or what was his plan to make money, or to be a philanthropist and to be the guy that helps retire fighters. He's got the geriatric league already, so helps retire fighters with some money in the bank because he is paying them because he enjoyed watching them in the past. Man, that's not a business model. You know what I mean? That's not a business model. So yeah, nobody asked the question, and then when it canceled, there's this like flabbergasted wave of news that comes out. Like they can't believe that here's another show that canceled, and they did all this, and then they don't put on the show, and the fighters all act like hurt. Like I was training. Come on. If you didn't have an inkling or a clue that this show was in a risk of your time and a risk to not happen, then Uriah Faber, through all his years in the MMA game, earned a reputation. First of all, he was a draw. So he was a guy who made money at a better pace and a better level than most of the other fighters in his era. He was a star. And after that, he also earned a reputation for not being, you know, Bigfoot Silva, who bought a Porsche for his wife and a Porsche for his daughter, and spent all his money. Uriah Faber was known as a guy that managed his money well, maybe like on the level of a similar to a George St. Pierre. I think St. Pierre obviously was a different tier of money, higher money, and maybe a little less lifestyle. But there are some guys that are known for being smart with their money, and Faber is one of them. So you're going to tell me that Faber naively signed this contract and is like, well, no, I'm not going to get paid. I don't know what to do. He knew he wasn't. He knew he was. This was a 50-50 shot at best.
Right. It's I think a lot of those, they did say they had some guys on retainer. I don't know how much that was for, but
What does
that
that mean? That they
like
weren't
they were getting
paying them
some
monthly?
stipends. They were getting stipends of some sort to be kind of promotional voices, to show their self. Like, in the draft. The second I saw Tyron Woodley as the first pick, I knew this thing wasn't happening because who in the right mind would pick him first?
Yeah. Again, the draft.
He's the guy who's
You
lost
know,
most of his last fights and didn't look good doing it.
and again, that draft was enough. I mentioned the dollar amounts that were being thrown around in public was the first red flag. Maybe it was the second red flag behind the actual draft that they published on YouTube and put out in media because it was definitely amateur hour. They got a couple of known names to sit in front of a green screen, and they put some graphics behind them, and again, maybe paid them appearance fees and stuff like that. But again, the entire presentation was definitely amateur hour. You know, um, if you look at the NFL draft, the NBA draft, when the guys are present and appearing on camera, they're usually ready to put the colors of the team on, and they're usually dressed in suits or in some type of professional attire, and trying to show respect to what they're doing. We had a lot of guys for this draft taping in wife beaters in their kitchen,
Yeah.
and we kind of laughed about it when it was going on, but that's a major red flag. That was the one where I could not come out of that and feel like this has legs. I had more. I was closer to my prediction where I said this isn't even going to happen, and that's more of obviously I was right with that. They didn't really show me anything that led me to believe any. We got exactly what was going to happen. Anybody who believed anything different that we were going to get to see this show somehow or other, including the fighters, is not being sincere and doesn't really understand how to read the bones or the wins or whatever is in the works here, because this was an embarrassment from the beginning.
Yeah. Maybe talk historically about some other, because most people that are watching the sport today, except for those of us that stuck around, aren't familiar with other events that have done this kind of thing. So maybe talk a little bit historically about that.
Okay. Well, I think, you know, shows, for example, that were canceled before their first event are few and far between. I think you've got the famous Battleship example
Yeah.
that's out there where they claimed that they were going to do MMA fights on
Who
a
was
ship.
behind that?
I, I, again, in a situation like that, and Jamie Levine is another guy where Jamie Levine was always looking, rest in peace and everything, but he was always looking for pushing the edge of like, okay, I want no rules fights or no time limit fights and stuff. And there comes a time where the sport became more accepted because of more regulation and the boxing commissions and more rules and stuff. And yes, the purists always chafed at that, but Battleship to me was always, an attempt to do a show outside of territorial waters of a country so they're not subject to any jurisdiction and stuff so that they can bend or have very as little rules as possible. Those shows have no legs.
Yeah.
We've already seen no rules fights, and they really don't look like a technical sport anymore. If you watch, you know, Emmanuel Yarborough versus Keith Hackney, for example, or Keith Hackney versus Joe San, or um, James Waring versus Eric Paulson.
Paulson, yeah.
Fights where they had very, very limited to no rules, and you can't, you can't sell that to the general public over and over again. So Battleship to me was also something that I looked at with skepticism, and I think that was the main reason for them was that this was a long time ago, so they were still under the fantasy of no rules. We're going to be the purists, and we're going to have as little rules as possible. So that's one of the big examples. What I think is more interesting is to look at the guys that actually blew some money and spent some money on running one or two shows, and then the shows did not go down, or just ran one show and had to bail out and not pay people, and then those become things, examples of events that you can compare GFL to, but those guys took a loss and then they realized it's a steep climb. Now I got to I'm going to either lose money in my second show, or maybe if I break even or make a little money back, I still have a lot to recoup from the loss of the first show. So you're going to have to run 3, 4 shows positively in the green to recover the money from the first show. And obviously, not a lot of people succeeded in doing that. I think the big example of these types of shows is Affliction. They ran 2 major shows, and they actually had the business behind them. Affliction had been a T-shirt company, a high-end T-shirt company that back in the day had a product that was hot, and they were making a lot of money. At the end of the day, if you're buying $100 T-shirt, it still costs about $5 to make that shirt, right? So these guys were at one point uh, able to flash some cash around. They sponsored fighters, and the fighters enjoyed getting those paychecks, and that gave them the comfort that these guys had money. They ran 2 shows that were exceptionally good shows in terms of name recognition and name value and stuff like that. But by the time they had their third show, which was even a step up of what they wanted to do, they did cancel it. And one of the major reasons they canceled it is because the first 2 shows were not profitable. Now you look at a third show where you're going deeper into the hole, and judging by the cards and what you could see that they had on there, um, they were looking at being 30, $40 million in the hole like the UFC was, but only after 3 shows.
Mm-hmm.
So they bailed out and they canceled, and that's I think a good example of even a high end T-shirt company or a shirt or clothing company with a lot of money turns out to not really have enough money that they could just spend and lose money at will. Again, and that takes casino owner, um, foreign investment. It takes that level of money, and we may be seeing it in this way, shape, or form Uh, even uh, Dana, who's got tons of money, right? Dana and his Turkish investor or Saudi investor for boxing, they had some press conferences and stuff like that. But then, very different than when Dana runs with a product.
Hmm.
Very different is we got that one press conference and that announcement of like a salary structure and things like that, and then nothing, nothing, tumbleweeds. No, no information, nothing coming out, no card announced, nothing. So this may be a situation where for sure, Dana and that investor could blow $20 million on a few shows and not really feel it at home. It's not like, oh, I lost 30% of my value. These guys have big, 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 big money, but they don't want to lose it. They don't want to lose their money, so they haven't announced anything yet. And that may be the next place that we see this happen is that Dana's big "we're in boxing now" announcement turns out to not amount to much. He still doesn't really have any boxers under contract, right?
Well, Turkey Al Sheikh said he's going to have him promote Canelo versus Crawford. That's going to be his first endeavor in this whole
Okay, well, we'll see how he can make it happen
boxing.
because Canelo and Crawford will both have contracts with other companies that they're going to have to navigate. And Dana doesn't like to play friends with people. So we'll see how that comes together. And again, I'm not enamored of that fight. I think Crawford is maybe perhaps the best pound for pound fighter we've seen this century. I think that highly of him. I think he's head and shoulders above Floyd Mayweather, and I think he would have wasted Floyd in if they both fought in their prime at 147 pounds. Um, I love Crawford, but he's fighting a much bigger guy, and I'm not enamored with fights that break 2, 3 barriers in weight classes because they're just being put together for the average fan that doesn't recognize how big a difference that can be. Canelo's not a chump in terms of skill. He's been around for a long time. He's not out of the neighborhood of Crawford. Crawford is the better technical boxer, but it's not like that difference alone is going to help carry the day against Canelo. Canelo has some things he can do to make up for it. Keep in mind, Canelo lost to Mayweather. So maybe he will lose that same way, but that was a much younger Canelo, right? So Canelo's been carrying the mantle first. And again, Canelo and Crawford are both owned contractually by different boxing companies. How are you going to go ahead and take them away from those contracts? Maybe they'll go ahead and pay, for those companies to release them or give them an out or give them, a one-off fight that they can do under Dana. But those are going to be big payments those companies are going to request, right? So again, uh, they've talked, but I want to see a show, and I want to see 20 shows from Dana in his boxing persona before I'm sold that he's going to be an entity in boxing.
Yeah.
Like I said, this may be the next place where you see a company kind of make a big splash and a big announcement, but then at the end of the day, back off because they don't see a way to make their money back.
I think Turkey's a debut and not necessarily debut, but his show in New York in Times Square was kind of an embarrassment this past weekend because, you know, I think people thought, okay, you're going to have it in Times Square and maybe they'll have it barricades somewhere, but a large crowd of people are going to be able to watch it both from the ground and from high up. And I can see how that might be a security nightmare given the way things go these days. But what they did was they put up a giant walls, huge walls, and no one could see it from street level at all. And I wouldn't be surprised if they took some security measures to prevent people from seeing it from above too, for obvious reasons, with the way things go on these days. But it just kind of like, what was the point if you were going to do that? You could have done that anywhere, you know.
Yeah, yeah, Times Square is a glossy location. Everybody knows, oh, Times Square. But at the same time, do it in the old Felt Forum. It's which is it's basically Madison Square Garden. With the 5,000 seat version of it, but Madison Square Garden. and you're not losing out on name recognition. I think it might be. I don't know if it's the Kodak Theater or what the name of the
Mm.
old Fell Forum is now, but it's still there. It's a 5,000 seat venue attached to Madison Square Garden. Why not do it like a normal boxing show indoors, and not again to put up walls? Yeah, they're big plastic walls and stuff like that, but this is New York with uh unions involved. Like, so it's not like they could say, we'll bring in like 30 Saudi workers or Pakistanis to put up the walls and stuff like that. They have to be union workers for New York City, making a salary and stuff like that. That wasn't cheap. And now you're spending money on BS and not on the actual fights. So again, I don't think they walked away from the Times Square show with a profit.
Yeah.
And again, this guy can handle losing some money, but you don't become rich like that by being okay with losing money. It's something that you're not going to last very long doing.
Mm.
Especially like he may be a boxing fan, but I'm not sure if it's that passion that burns in him. Well, I think the passion for money and making money is higher than his passion for the sport.
And I don't think the fights turned out the way he would have hoped had he wanted to promote a future fights between these guys that were on the cards. Ryan Garcia got beat, and Devin Haney didn't look good at all. So it didn't turn out the way he probably hoped.
Yeah, yeah. And again, and that's the other part of it is when you have a promotion, and if you're going to do true sport, you've got to be ready to do the next show, no matter what the results of this show are. So you can't be counting on, well, show number
Right.
two will be Haney versus Ryan Garcia. You cannot count on that, especially before, once it's in the books, that's where you do the fights. But once it's in the books, then you can start planning and you can have a general outline. But now that this happened, you're much less likely to go ahead and do another show because it's not as appealing to you.
Right. It's they could have matched up Garcia better to where it would have ensured that he won instead of putting him in there with Rolly, who's tough.
Yeah, yeah. Garcia, you know, he's a great boxer, but at some point he became more of a social influencer as well. Like, and so I think that makes that it's up and down as to which version of Ryan Garcia you're going to get.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And after you took the loss to Gervonta Davis, once you're taking that first loss, then you really got to buckle up if you're not going to lose again. You know, and sometimes you'll just have to take another loss because you're not as prepared, you're not as ready, and you're more amicable to taking that loss. Um, hold on a second here. But yeah, so to talk about another show like that we talked about shows that didn't go anywhere. Back in 2010, there was a show called Nemesis Fighting, and the Nemesis Fighting Championship took place again, inviting big name fighters. Keith Jardine was on the show, um, Paul Bonatello, Elliot Marshall, Terry Martin, John Dodson, guys that were well known in the business were invited to that show in Santo Domingo or Dominican Republic rather. And um, yeah, the bottom line is like, yeah, I'll take a flight to the Dominican Republic. And how much are you going to pay me? Five figures, good for back then, good payday. Sure, I'm in. I'm in. And guys went. They actually did the show. The show's in the books and is out there. But guess what? None of the guys got paid. And again, if you look at it, you've got Canelo took his first loss to Floyd Mayweather back in 2013, but then he came back and went on an extended winning streak. And then fought Golovkin, got a draw, and then avenged that by beating Golovkin. So he'd still, and then he went on another long winning streak before he lost to Dimitri Bivol, who Bivol is really uh, light heavyweight. And, at that point, Canelo was overreaching for his weight classes, I think. And Bivol's another pretty highly skilled guy, but going ahead and staying with like Ryan Garcia did not do that. Obviously, now he's put together a full losses in his last handful of fights, and it's very different than the focus that Canelo showed. So Garcia, to me, is a risk as a big name. You're hiring a guy because he has some social media impact as well, and for a name, but for you to count on him as a cornerstone for your promotion, it's questionable.
Right. And then you had a show in my area, 2014 Battlegrounds MMA, which only had one event, and it had Kenny Monday and Richard Cho was actually the matchmaker, but I think he bailed on the show not long before it happened, if I remember correctly. And some guys didn't get paid. Jukow, who won, had to get his money, got shorted. Um, and the guy who was the behind it or the promoter, so to speak, they had some big names on that. Chael Sonnen and Jim Ross were the announcers. They
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of top fighters in that tournament, and they never did another show. And now the guy who was the promoter, I use that term loosely, was Brian O'Rourke, who's in jail now, in prison. So this
Again,
isn't unheard of.
Chael Sonnen behind the microphone is nice. Jim Ross behind the microphone is nice. There isn't a single ticket that is sold because they are your announcers.
That's right.
At Bodog, we made the same mistake. We had the Colonel. Uh, the Colonel, I forget his full name, but the Colonel was actually the guy who called the Thriller in Manila back in the old days. So, an all-time Hall of Fame boxing announcer, and we brought him into Bodog. And when I heard his salary, I was like, "Why? Why are we doing this?" Um, because that doesn't sell any tickets. It's just another expenditure that shows do naively thinking that some of these name recognition things are going to make you your money. And the bottom line is especially in a generational sense, where right now I think the 20-year olds, 20s and 30s, that generation of people that have made money, and there are many of them that have done well, made money. Those are the guys spending money now. That's where your disposable income is. Guys that may have a lot of money but are in their 40s and 50s are already moved on to thinking of legacy or their families or whatever. So spending money on guys my age, even if they have big money, expecting us to spend big money because of nostalgia or whatever, that's not the way to go. You're looking at young people and spending money and the thrill of going to Vegas or the thrill of doing this and stuff like that. And you're way off if you think Jim Ross is going to attract, 28-year-old with a couple of $1 million in the bank to go spend on your event and go to Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, he's from Oklahoma, so maybe he had felt some, you know, affinity for Kenny Monday or something.
Yeah, I don't think Jim Ross's affinity for any of that extended to him doing the fight show for free.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I'm sure he took his fee home, right?
right. As
And I'm
did
sure that
Chael.
and I'm sure the dumb promoter in Oklahoma thought, "Oh, it's so cool, I can, talking to friends at the bar or whatever. Yeah, I'm paying Jim Ross. I know Jim Ross. That carries some weight in social circles in Oklahoma, and even in wrestling circles and things. And Jim Ross is a guy who's done enough in the business over decades that he could be known anywhere in the country for you. And that's really what these guys are paying for is to rub elbows with celebrities. And that just doesn't impress me. So that's why, when we were spending money on the Colonel, and I think the Colonel did a good job for Bodog, actually. He tried. He did an exceptionally good job, but I think that was money that could have been spent on adding another fight.
Yeah, yeah. I see that today. I see that with local promotion here, and I love Frank Shamrock more than anybody. I think he's an all-time great. He was, like I've said many times, he's probably the first greatest of all-time fighter we saw in MMA. But yeah, to pay him to
But
come to the
I will tell you this. We've done a top five MMA all time, and I've had Fedor, Anderson Silva, John Jones, And that's been like the composition of my list. And I think a guy that I put Dan Henderson on that list. I think Dan Henderson belongs on there, but I think
Not GSP.
um, I'm not a GSP fan.
Mm,
I think GSP had a little bit of a play it safe type of style. I think he's obviously in the top 10, but top five, it's just a preference.
mm,
And he didn't have a lot of MMA fights, but look at his body of work and a guy that very few people mention for this list. I think Boss Rutan belongs on there
yeah. The
because
reason I had Frank and guys like GSP too is I think one thing that is rare about a lot of fighters is, and I think Frank and GSP both had this, is guys are like, if we don't get to their level, we might as well just quit.
mhm,
If we aren't doing what they're doing, we might as well just quit. And I think they had that effect on the sport, those two guys,
yeah, yeah.
especially
And
those two
since
guys.
I think we have slated on the chalkboard today to talk a little bit about Bo Nickal, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we can
So
do it
now you
now if you
mentioned
want.
Frank. Yep. Now
But
you mentioned Frank Shamrock. I think that's a good segue because
well,
if
what?
you
Let
look
me
at
make my point first. Dale Cook,
okay,
Dale Apollo Cook. I'm sure you've heard of him. He was on the
hmm
Hickson Gracie choke. He runs a show here in Tulsa, and he paid to have Frank Shamrock come to his last event. Frank's probably not going to sell it a single ticket coming to the event, but you're paying him to come. You know, which is
hmm
fine. I'm not against it. Like I said, I like Frank probably more than most people. Fight wise.
yep. And if
If
your
he gets
show's
money, and more
profitable,
power to him. You know,
yeah,
but is it necessary to bring people? Probably not.
no, no. But Frank is paying, you're paying Frank 10,000 or whatever his appearance fee is, and your show makes $25,000 a show, and you're profitable. That's okay. Spend some money on Frank, and then you get to hang out with him, get to know him. You have stories to tell, but you're making money. But if your show is not making money,
Hmm.
and you're spending an extra $10,000 or whatever his appearance fee is on these people, that's really terrible for business. It's a death knell for business. You're not going if you're not purely in it for the passion and just going to spend the money, then you've not done the right thing. But I'll give you the example of what makes Frank so great and why I cannot disagree with you that Frank is one of those guys on that list, top 10 all time. He had his long run in Pancrase, and he was obviously Ken's little brother, little adopted brother or whatever you want to call it. But he was able to use his Shamrock name, and he went to Pancrase. And Pancrase, whether you like it or not, and I know John Peretti believed that there were a lot of works in Pancrase, and there may have been some works, but I do think that was an unbelievably advanced competition level, also, especially for the era, especially for ground technique and fighting on the ground and things like that. That was where you saw some of the most advanced fighting in the world. And with their rules, which allowed for rope escapes, and Boss Rutan has said this, so you know, take it from an authority. You have a submission in on a guy, and you're about to finish, and he uses a rope escape, and you have to continue the fight. You may as well go into the second part of that fight 1-0. You've won the first fight. He uses rope submission because he would have had to quit otherwise. So the experience level of a guy that is 30-0, but also had to deal with 15 rope escapes in there is actually like 45 different fights. Right. So I respect the guys from Pancrase, the top level guys, Funaki, Shamrock, Rutan, Semi Schilt came from there. To a certain extent, Evan Tanner came from there. We had UFC champions galore coming with Pancrase pedigree. Obviously, Ken Shamrock came from Pancrase, and Matt Hume spent time in Pancrase. So at some point, they had the most elite of the elite fighters, but people poo-poo it because it was slightly different rules. So Shamrock comes in to make his MMA debut, and God bless whoever the matchmaker was for this fight. It may have even been Peretti, but John Lober was a handful for anybody back in those days. John Lober was mean, had that Street Fighter mentality, technical, physically gifted, strong, and also had that did not give an F, kind of attitude. And if you look at Frank Shamrock's MMA debut, John Lober beat him up.
No, that was TJ who did that fight.
Okay,
It wasn't
TJ.
Peretti.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I didn't think it was Peretti, but it has. I know Peretti is one of the people that when you say John Lober, he's forgotten now. But I know John Peretti is one of the guys that will remember John Lober as a top 5 guy
And
back in
that's
the day.
TJ Thompson. For anyone who's watching this, TJ Thompson, promoter Super Brawl, well-known guy in the MMA space back in those days.
So now John Lober beat him up.
Hmm. No doubt.
So Bo Nickal got beat up the other day.
Yeah.
Is Bo Nickal going to do what Gregor Gillespie did, which is basically maybe fight one more time so I don't go out on a loss and then he's done? Or is he going to do what Frank Shamrock did, which is Frank stuck with it, fought, became UFC champion, and then as UFC champion, asked for a rematch with John Lober, and then creamed John
Yeah.
Lober.
Hmm.
That's what I want to see out of Bo Nickal now. The wherewithal to understand that with 7 fights, you didn't even belong in the UFC. Back when Frank joined the UFC, he had 20 pancrase fights. So, you didn't get into the UFC with 5 or 6 fights. You're still in preparation for the sport. You could read all the hype and go on so many places that are telling you that you're the best, but you're not ready for top level competition.
Right.
So, what are you going to do now? Are you going to quit? I understand if you quit because finances go into it as well, and you take a step back, and you may not be making enough money, and this and the other thing. So I'm not knocking you if you quit, but what I want to see in the mindset is what Frank Shamrock showed. And Frank went back to the drawing board, and when he got his chance at Lober again, he embarrassed Lober. I was at that second fight live. It happened in Brazil, and it was an ass kicking of big proportions.
Yeah, Lober actually tapped to strikes, which you don't see a lot. Yeah.
And unexpected from Lober too.
Yeah.
Because that's not Lober, but Lober got into a situation in that fight where he's like, I don't really have a chance. Why take more?
Right.
And because Frank had done the work, improved his mind, improved his body, improved his technique, done everything he needed to do to progress as a martial artist to the point where he enacted revenge. So now in 8 to 10 fights, I would like to see Bo Nickal run off a nice winning streak and ask for this Dutch guy back and to see him dominate him. I don't know if he can. I don't know if as hard a worker as a wrestler of his level is reputed to be, that what Frank Shamrock did is work in MMA. I don't know if Bo Nichols is good enough or strong enough of mind to do the work necessary to, to enact the game plan I'm talking about here, which is get better to the point where next time I'm in the ring with this guy, I leave no question that I am a better fighter and that the first time is a point in time that he caught me, but he's never going to catch me again. I'm the better fighter.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's going to be Bo Nickal's mentality. It certainly wasn't Gregor Gillespie's, and Gillespie was another guy, 14-0 in the UFC, and people are scared of him, and the hype train was going, and he got knocked out, and we looked it up, and he had a fight canceled, and then he did fight again and won before he walked away from the sport. And that's okay. I don't want to go out a loss. I'm going to fight one more time to win, and then I'll quit. That's okay. I understand it. Again, finances play a big part in that. You're not making enough money. But Frank wasn't making enough money. The problem with Frank has always been he wasn't making enough money and he knew it. So, he became this difficult to deal with character and stuff. But in those days, when he was focused on just becoming the best fighter in the world, he showed you what you do with a loss
Yeah.
when he took on Lober twice.
Yeah, he did it a year later. I was just looking at that, how much time elapsed. So the first
How many
one,
fights in between, too?
several, because
Yeah,
they were much busier back then, because the money wasn't as good. But let's see, he fought Lober, Fought Lober on January 17, 1997. Then he fought TK, Wes Gasaway, Enson Inouye, Kevin Jackson. All wins, by the way. Igor Zinoviev, Jeremy Horn. So he won 6 fights between then and May of 98. So January 97 and May 98. Then he fought Lober again in October of 98. So, yeah,
Is anyone out there still questioning that Frank doesn't belong in the top 10?
yeah, yeah,
Come on, listen to that. Listen to that.
yeah.
Inoue, Zinoviev. Zinoviev is
Horn,
another guy in Peretti's top 5 back in those days.
yeah,
Um, and that probably also in that time frame includes submitting Dan Henderson in the contenders.
yeah,
So yeah, Frank, you could almost now thinking about it, and I'm a person that's disappointed that we didn't get to see Frank. Frank, took many years off and then came back and then was, a little bit difficult to deal with, and it was more talk about his personality, his technique, and stuff like that. But when he was at his peak, and when he was focused on this sport, that's what's missing in the sport today.
yeah. And if Nickal's special, he'll do that. If he's not, he won't.
Yeah. So Nickal took a loss, and it looked like it was a body shot, right?
Well, he was getting beat up to the body really bad. You know,
Yeah.
he got knee to the body several times. He took several punches to the body, all in the clinch. Just like bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
And then the final one was a really hard knee. Kind of separate. They separate a little bit, and then Ritter drove his knee into him from a little bit of a distance, and that was it.
So I'll sum it up in a example, because if he's hurt, obviously he needs to take care of himself and stuff. But where's his mind at?
Right.
Is he in the gym on Monday? Because a lot of guys um there's a famous boxer, and he's dead now. Committed suicide in jail, and he was one of those crazy boxers. Edwin Valero is his name. And if you don't know Edwin Valero, look this guy up, because he is 27-0, died undefeated. And he was a street kid from Venezuela, had talent, was mean, loved to fight, and he got taken to the United States and was starting to get promoted, starting to make fights. And they found in Texas that he had like a shadow on his brain in one of the MRI exams or something that they didn't like, and they suspended him. And he took a 6 month suspension or something like that in the middle of his career, just as he was about to break big. And he was a multiple time world champion. And like I said, he died undefeated, so we'll never know. Um, he's famous for saying, Mayweather, he's not a fighter. Fighting is, I love to have my face broken. I love to break faces. So he was an extra special uh, dose of what a real fighter is, with a lot of negatives. Like I said, he was in jail for hurting his wife, and he was a kid with no education from the streets of Venezuela and stuff. But the day after he was suspended by the Texas Boxing Commission, it looked like his career was over. He was in the gym training. And that's what you don't teach. Frank Shamrock had that. Valero's another example, even though there's so many negatives with him that people, may poo-poo it. But when you look at in-ring work and what he did, amazing, amazing stuff. And that's that fighter mentality that seems to be lost now. Now the fighter mentality has been replaced more by a professional mentality, which you got to do it. You got to do it. But there is a specialty that I'm waiting to see what Bo Nickal does, because Bo Nickal still has all the potential that he had before. He took a loss in his 8th fight. That's not unusual. That's not weird. What did you think? This was the guy who was going to go beat John Jones's record or Khabib's record? Those guys, Jones is special. I don't put Khabib much in my top 5 either, because I think Khabib, he may have gotten lucky with there was a fight against a Brazilian guy that many people think he lost, and I think he lost. Um, and I think they protected him a little bit
Mhm.
up until a certain point. And Khabib is every bit a dog. Khabib is the guy capable of these types of like. I think Khabib, if he had lost, would have been in the gym on Monday during his heyday. Now, he's retired and reaping the benefits of his career and stuff. But I think Khabib had the right mentality. I think the Chechens bring that mentality now, but that mentality's lost. So Bo Nickal has a chance to actually solidify his position as a top fighter correctly by coming back, going on a winning streak, avenging the loss, and going on to continue to have a great career for 10 years. Because that's what was always expected. But if you expect him to go with an offer, with no losses or whatever, well, now that's not the case. And is that it? Does he call it quits? Then then you put your money on the wrong horse.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because he was. It looked like he was hurt though, but it did look like he had a little quit in him too. He kind of turned away and he's kind of taking the shot. He was hurt. He's trying to hide his one side of his body a little bit. And he couldn't really fight back
He had
much.
he had 7 fights,
Yeah, he
and
wasn't
and that's
ready.
the
I
thing.
agree.
And
I
as
agree.
a wrestler, people are like, "Oh, his boxing is so great." It's like, okay, but is he? And they make fun of on videos and stuff, and you see stupid videos of like trainers that are taking a guy and like blindfolding him and making him put his arms up and they hit him in the stomach. But there is something to be said for live sparring. Like Strickland, I think, is a good example of a guy who spars live a lot, and he's going to be okay with getting hit to the body throughout a fight and compensate for it. But I think Bo Nickal got hurt enough to the body that he was in a place that he'd never been before
Right.
because and that's what causes a reaction. Like Bo Nickal didn't want to two commentators the day after his fight saying he got a little quit in him. He was turning around. He doesn't want that to be his
Right.
reaction, but it's because he was not advanced enough in that aspect of the game. And the aspect of the game is taking punishment. I'm not advocating live sparring as like the way Sean Strickland does it because it looks like um it's not great for longevity for most guys. But Bo Nickal was a little green in that aspect of it, and this Dutch guy that was kind of known for jujitsu and groundwork and stuff. The Dutch guys know how to fight standing up. He was real comfortable in the plum. He was real comfortable in the clinches, and that's because they have some Muay Thai, more Muay Thai. He had more Muay Thai than Bo Nickal had, and that's the bottom line.
Mhm.
And Bo wasn't ready for that level of infighting, and that's the big problem because he should be fighting at hook and shoot with 7 fights.
But I also think that these trainers a lot of times don't train guys the right way. He should be taking guys down, and if they get up, take them down again. If they get up, take them down again. None of this.
This guy
You
wasn't going to
should
be
only
easy.
be fighting standing up if they're forcing you to.
Yeah, this guy, this Dutch kid, and I don't want to mispronounce his name,
Ritter.
but that's the difference between 20 fights and 7 fights.
Yeah, no doubt
He
about it.
had been he had been in certain spots before. Nickal put him on his back a couple of times.
He
There
did,
were a
and he.
couple of times where he actually reversed him, and he was
Mhm.
chest to chest on top of Nickal, working for submissions. Nickal knew what to do with the submissions. He was there, but this guy was. If Bo Nickal had been as prepared in the stand up to take a little bit of body damage as the Renier was on the ground, then we'd be in a different fight. And the other part of it is Bo Nickal may be an A type athlete, but based on what we saw this weekend, is he an A plus plus athlete? I'm not sure of that anymore.
Mhm.
I'm not sure of that anymore. He may be able to prove that to me later that he is a Kevin Jackson, a Kevin Randleman. But I saw a great athlete, a guy who's well trained at wrestling and things like that. But the other guy was 3 inches bigger, longer, as strong, didn't have the wrestling technique, but was even attempting takedowns on Bo and trying to throw him around, and at times was able to defend his takedowns well. So the athleticism divide was not there for Bo Nickal.
Mhm.
So yeah, like I said, will he be in the gym on Monday? I think that's the big question.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of people are going to come at him, too. Because I think he was reading some of his own press. He was pretty confident. He's calling out guys like Chimaev who would have killed him. Um, and so he's got to go back to the drawing board. He got humbled, just like Frank Shamrock did when John Lober knocked his teeth out in Super Brawl. Um, and Frank Shamrock, he came back a meaner person. When it came time to fight Lober again, he annihilated Lober. Beat him up so bad that he quit.
So there's a message to Bo Nickal. It's like you are at a crossroads right now, my friend. Stop reading the press. Go back. Go do the work. Come back with a 4 or 5 fight winning streak where you can ask for this guy to Renier back. And when you guys get into the ring, you show me. You don't tell me. You show me that you're superior.
Yep, no doubt. Yeah, good stuff as always, Miguel. Everybody watching these episodes, as always, we want you to subscribe to the channel, and we have 99-cent memberships, cheap memberships that you can just spend a little bit to support the channel rather than a lot. And you know, always a joy to talk to Miguel. I don't get as enough chances to lately because he's more busy. But we'll try and get these episodes out to you when we can with his insights.
Always good to talk to you, Todd. Always good to hear, and read the comments and the fans out there. I know we got a few people. Some people I respect that do comments and stuff like that have legitimate points. I love the conversation. I love sometimes we've even had an episode with them joining us and stuff like that. I'd love to do more of that, and hopefully we got more of that in the future.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, as always, great talking to you. Everybody, we appreciate you checking out the shows. Until next episode, see you later.